There was once a faraway land, a kingdom whose king was quite self-involved. He was known throughout the realm for being cruel and rather arrogant. He was unwed and never cared for the people of the kingdom. On his 40th birthday, he sent a decree that he wanted the best sculptor to come to his castle and to commission a flattering likeness of himself. So the decree was put out, but no one wanted to accept it until a humble artisan received word of this decree. He was a widower who had a young daughter who loved to read and write. She had an insatiable appetite for books and wrote the most beautiful poetry. He sent the king a message that he would accept the invitation and sculpt the king's likeness as long as he could bring his daughter with him. The king accepted these terms, and so the sculptor and his daughter packed some belongings and made the long journey to the king's castle. They traveled 2 long days, met many interesting characters along the way, some who asked them where they were headed. When they said they were going to meet the king, some scoffed and even spit on the ground in disgust, even told them to give a big nose to show their disdain for the monarch. Others thought he wasn't so vile. However, most were rather indifferent. Finally, once they had arrived at the castle, they weren't greeted with any fanfare or anything fancy. They rested their horses in the stable and brought their belongings to the rooms provided to them. Soon it would become apparent this king was somehow all alone and very lonely. He was suffering, mainly from boredom, but lacked any sense of what friendship was. He was embarrassingly rude and had never really had a real friend before, nor had he ever learned how to make a friend. The sculptor and his lovely daughter noticed this right away. There weren't even any servants, no handmaids, no butlers, no kitchen staff. The poor king didn't even have gardeners. No one wanted to help him. The king was beyond difficult, beyond conceited, even beyond polite. A rude, self-centered, and incredibly ignorant individual who had not even one friend in this world save the portrait of his beloved mother. This picture was his most prized possession, a statuesque woman who he adored with all his being. On their first night at the castle, they threw together a meal of vegetables and fruits with a simple pheasant and sat together to eat. The sculptor's daughter gathered the courage to ask the king about the portrait. He told them that she was his mother and that she was killed in a hunting incident when he was young. They did not press for more information. They ate and enjoyed some light conversation only to retire to their chambers. The next few days were rather fun. The sculptor's daughter discovered a wonderful library with an abundance of books about every subject one could ask for. The sculptor began preparing for his work. He asked the king to take his pose. He asked him how he wanted his likeness to look. Did he want to be standing or sitting? He agreed to stand. He thought it was more regal to stand. Soon the sculptor was prepared to begin, and so he did. He brought out his chisel, and the king revealed to them the most beautiful piece of marble the sculptor had ever laid his eyes on. An 8-foot tall slab that must have weighed many hundreds of pounds. His daughter was even awestruck by its sheer volume. After a few moments, the king cleared his throat, and things went on. The sculptor asked where the slab was purchased, and the king said it was a gift from a faraway kingdom whose queen had received it and wished to send him a gift to honor his late mother, because they had summered together as children. The king didn't know her, but felt it would be polite to accept this gift. The sculptor went right to work and had no idea now of exactly what to do. He held the chisel and took his first stroke. After a few more, he noticed something special. The king began to become more friendly with them both, and every chunk of marble that fell, his false facade was breaking away. He was becoming their friend, little by little and bit by bit. His nobility was falling away. Meanwhile, the sculptor's daughter was taking in book after book, enjoying the vast amenity of a full library, and even access to a beautiful kitchen. That night, she whipped up a delightful dinner. They gathered for the meal and discussed what they would do the next day. The sculptor was very pleased with the progress. The king even more so. He was on cloud nine with joy. He even said he hadn't felt this happy since he was a child. The sculptor's daughter was somewhat smitten by this new side of the king. She was a bit shy before, but now looked at him with what could only be described as warmth. Not quite love yet, but she knew he was changing. He was becoming likable, possibly lovable. Soon they all retired once again to their chambers. This is when a song played in her dreams, Elton John's Your Song. She awoke the next day with new charisma and passion. She fixed them all breakfast made for a king, literally, and her father was very pleased. The king even more so. He and the sculptor wolfed down the eggs, the ham, almost anything on the plates was gone in a very short time. She barely got in a few bites, and both men asked, "Is there more?" Sadly, there wasn't, and she said she needed to leave them to go to the market. Her father didn't like her to travel alone. The king offered to escort her there. After few convincing words, he agreed to let them both leave together. He would stay and continue his work. So the king and the sculptor's daughter gathered some food that was left and prepared the horses and set out to the market, a quarter's day journey. They rode for a while until they crossed paths with a man who bakes potions who had set up along their path. They cordially asked him what he was doing, and he regaled them with his story. A tale of wondrous highs and disastrous lows. He was a dragon slayer and a knight, a lover, not a fighter, a world traveler and a scholarly professor, a world-renowned knower of everything under the sun, a clergyman and a bottler of wines. But today he is the only and best baker of potions that heal all wounds, especially those of heartache, of the emotional kind. He promised them a potion that could requite true or lost love, and find two loves that were truly meant to be. The king scoffed so slightly while the sculptor's daughter was buying it hook, line, and sinker. She may have been naive, but the man seemed very genuine, and his alchemy seemed legitimate. So they traded some food for 2 vials of his potion. He warned them that both parties must drink the potion for it to work. They said their goodbyes to the man and thanked him and went on their way. If they had looked back, the man had disappeared quite quickly. The sculptor, meanwhile, left to his own devices, was really progressing with the sculpture. He had gotten to the shoulders, the head was completed, and he was deciding on the arms and chest. He almost began second-guessing himself, but continued sculpting. As he was working, a little kitten entered the room, and then an adorable frog. He welcomed the kitten with a bowl of cream. The frog was so tiny, he felt bad he couldn't offer it anything until he watched it find itself a few flies. That's that, I guess, he thought. The kitten lingered for a bit longer, and the frog too. The sculptor was happy to have some company. He went on about his work, entertained by his new friends. He did wonder when his daughter and the king would return. He hoped it would be soon. At the market, the king was greeted with disdain and snickers of disrespect by some of the vendors. The sculptor's daughter was angered by this. She rushed to defend him, telling them that you don't know him. How can you judge someone you don't even know? It's unfair to assume he's conceited when most of your opinion is based on the fact that he's a king and probably has every amenity when the reality is very different. With the king's permission, she explained the monarch's reality to them and turned their disdain into sympathy. The vendors empathized with him and they promised to make an effort to visit him more frequently, finding it sad that he had no staff and no friends. So the sculptor's daughter had an epiphany. She would throw the king a birthday celebration for his 40th anniversary and invited the vendors to come to the castle. They were so happy that the baker offered to bake a cake, the butcher offered to provide some meats, and the tailor would sew him a wonderful new wardrobe. So many new acquaintances were now on their way to the castle. The king was beside himself with anticipation and was beyond excited. He was beaming with happiness. He was also quite smitten with the sculptor's daughter. His thoughts were going toward love for her, but he kept his intentions in check. He promised himself he would remain a gentleman. When they returned, he was going to ask her father for her hand like a good nobleman. They began their trek back from the market, arriving during darkness. They put away the horses and began preparing for the birthday festivities. The king made his way to the sculptor to ask him for his daughter's hand. He looked to find the sculptor asleep near the likeness of the king. He covered him with a nearby blanket and resigned to ask him tomorrow. Before he left the room, the sculptor woke, and the king decided he would tell him. He said, "Your daughter has decided to throw a celebration in my honor, and tomorrow is going to be a day of fun and real merriment. I must ask you something. May I have your daughter's hand in marriage?" The sculptor looked deep into the king's eyes, almost into his soul. The sculptor did not see anything except love and genuine intentions. So he said, "If she says yes, then I would sanction your marriage, and with one request, which is you have some children. I want to be a grandfather. That can be arranged. Sleep well. See you in the morning, my friend." The next day, the sculptor's daughter awoke to a bustling castle where strangers were decorating and people were cooking in the kitchen, and the gardens were being tended to outside. She was pleasantly surprised. The king was eager to ask her for her hand, but decided to wait till later in the day. She went to check on her father, but he wasn't in his room, nor was he sculpting. In fact, the sculptor wasn't in the room. The king and the sculptor's daughter went to the garden to look for him, only to find a gorgeous stranger standing taller than the horses, staring back at them. Who are you?" The gentleman looked at them and said, "Don't you recognize me?" They both said, "No, I am the sculptor." Their jaws dropped, and then the king put his mind to this equation as he did the sculptor's daughter. The marble, which was from a faraway kingdom, was which faraway kingdom was it from exactly? The king said, "An eastern land." Is it possible that the marble was infused with some sort of spell or magic? The king retrieved a card that explained what had occurred. The sculptor, not happy as a sculptor, had become as beautiful on the outside as he is on the inside. He had become his creation. The king decided to ask for his daughter's hand, and the sculptor agreed. The sculptor's daughter said yes. And this was the tricky part. He wanted to take the potion, as so he proposed a toast. With the potion, he took his hand, and she drank hers. She looked at her father, then at the king. Her father in his new stature, but the king was whom she thought of as the man of her dreams, a kind man with a gentle, timid soul who just needed that small push to break out of his shyness. And with her help, he did. As for the king, he realized she was his true love, as well. He would only have eyes for her all his life, had led him to this moment. It was destiny. So the birthday had transitioned to a wedding, and sparing no time, the baker made a wedding cake, the tailor a dress, and they invited the nearby townsfolk to the castle grounds, where there was music, fun games, and lots of food and drink. Even the horses had fun. A magician entertained the children, who the daughter decided could use more books to read. So she decided to turn the castle library into a study for the local children. Her father became in high demand as an artist and as a model. The king still kept his promise. They had twins a year after their wedding. The sculptor was a grandfather, and the townsfolk went from rebuking their king to honoring him, and he went from being friendless to a wealth of names who adore him, and who adore the sculptor's daughter, and the prince and princess she bore. This is the story I call The Princess and the Sculptor. They actually did live a long, loving life, happily ever after. The end. For now.